Today, I'm going to show you all about rhythm patterns you can use to spice up your piano chords. And to accomplish this, we're going to take a simple chord pattern and apply different rhythm patterns to it in order of complexity. And here's the chord pattern. First chord, C major. Played notes C, E, G, bottom to the top. Next is an E minor chord, B, E, G. Then we're moving down to an F major chord, A, C, F. And then up to a G major chord with the notes B, D, G, bottom to the top. So practice that as much as you need to because we're going to be using that throughout the lesson. And here is the first rhythm pattern. This first one's simple, but we're going to build quickly. This one is just 4 quarter notes for each chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now say I wanted the piece to sound a bit faster. I could double time the notes into eighth notes. And here's how that's going to sound. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... You could even turn them into triplets for a different type of feel. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet. And as you can see, just by turning them into triplets, it gave a totally different sound to the music. So I want to talk about the pedal real quick, because you want to actually be using the pedal with these chords, but you can't just use it willy-nilly, or this will happen. Hear that? It doesn't sound so good, now does it? Now this is called the sustain pedal. You can't quite see it, but I am moving my foot down, and I'll tell you when I'm moving it down. So the whole point of the sustain pedal is to sustain the notes. So far, sounds pretty good. Almost sounds like the strumming of a guitar maybe, where some of those notes continue to ring out. However, if it blends between chords, all of those notes are going to start clashing together. It's like if you went on the piano and you just did this, right? Because those notes are still being held over and they eventually start to converge. So here's how you want to do it. So we're going to go back to our quarter note pattern again. There's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that one. And what I'm going to do is, before I even start playing, I have the pedal held down. And I'm going to play through the first 4 quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the time I'm lifting up and I'm changing chord, I'm also lifting up. It has to be done real quick to get it in time. I'm also lifting up on the pedal and pressing down as I hit that second chord. Up. Up. I'll just tell you when my foot is lifting up. So here we go. Down. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. And I wanted to make sure I told you about that because we're going to be using the pedals throughout all the rhythm patterns throughout the rest of the lesson here. And I want to make sure that you get it to sound good. Besides the pedal, another thing I want to note is that you can even go slower with the rhythms. So the slowest one we started with quarter notes. But say you wanted a slower feel even, you could do half notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be like good for like a slow, sad song. And you're going to see where a lot of these different slow and fast ideas are going to come into play towards the end of the lesson. All right, we covered all the basic patterns that the rest are going to be built on, and now it's time to get to the second rhythm set, which is a bit more interesting. This next pattern has to do with only hitting notes on beats 1 and 3, the strong beats of the measure, and it's going to create a different feel. And then I'm going to show you something you can do with your right hand to make those empty beats feel a bit more interesting. So for this one, I'm actually going to start duplicating the chords between both of the hands, really so I get a sense of what chord tones are, and I'm actually going to tell you more about that here in a minute. But let me play the pattern. This is just the first measure written out, but we're going to play this pattern through the entire chord progression. So here we go. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Now, once you get the hang of that, I'm going to show you what you can do with your right hand. So with your right hand, you can actually play chords in between if you want. You could go bum, bum. gives like almost like a stomping along feel. Bump, 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 which adds character to the piece. So that's one of the reasons I'm telling you about this one, even though it's so simple. So now I'm going to play it again, except with my right hand, I'm going to be playing notes of the chord. I'm just going to be playing them in like different orders. You know, I might play them as an arpeggio from the bottom to the top, and we're going to see how this goes. So as you can see, by adding in some just chord tones, notes of the chord with my right hand, just played a little out of order in those little gaps between the chords, really helped make things a lot more interesting. And of course, we're going to build more on that as we get later on in the lesson. This next one's the opposite. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba, 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 ba. Just like that. So once you get used to that, just like the last chord pattern we did, we can add in some right hand notes, except now we're adding them in mostly on beats 1 and 3 because we have rest there, and it would be nice to have a little sound there. So let's see what we can come up with. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Similar to those patterns, this time we're going to be playing 3 notes on, 1 note off, and you're going to be surprised what a difference this can make in the overall sound. So again, with the chord pattern, 1, 2, 3, off. 1, 2, 3, off. Bum, bum, bum. Now it sounds almost like a graduation song, right? I even forget what that song is called. It's my least favorite song in the world. Anyways, so what we're going to do this time is this gives us an opportunity to play something on that beat 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I recommend just choosing one of the notes of the chords to hit. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those 3 patterns were really good in trading off between the right hand and left hand sounds, and it adds quite a bit more flavor to the sound of the music. Okay, this next one may look a little crazy, or it may look a little simple to you, but it's important that I explain this because you're actually going to see more and more patterns with what we call 16th notes. So remember before we were doing quarters, 1, 2, 3, 4, they were double timing it to 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, now this is double timed even beyond that, 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a... Just like that. Yes, that many. And as you can see, that creates like quite a different character to it. Bump, 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 bump. Almost like you're running along type of feel. Or maybe a dog sees a rabbit or something is running through the fields. And you're going to notice why I keep mentioning these different scenarios at the end of the lesson, because it's all going to come full circle. So what I want to do, this is really important because this helps me show the next set of rhythm patterns we're going to talk about. So we have our beats 1, 2, 3, 4, and just a rhythm tip. Whenever something is beamed across like that in one group, that means it equals 1 beat total. That's true 99% of the time. I know somebody in the comments is going to go, Tim, what about the 1% of the time? Yeah, I know. I know 4 quarter notes or 4 eighth notes are usually beamed across. But anyway, take my word for it. 90% of the time, these are each of your 4 beats. And we also have the other half of the beat. So here's our ands, right? And we use this term E and a, 1 E and a. And that's how we're going to play each syllable of our beats. So 2E and a, 3E and a, 4E and a. Just like that. Now this one is hitting a 16th note at the very end of the measure, and it's going to give a different type of sound to it. No duh, right? That's what all these chord patterns are for. Now to count this appropriately, because we have a 16th note on there, we have to first count out our first 3 beats And beat 4 is going to hit on this rest here, E and we have to make sure that we hit this last 16th on So we're actually hitting this dotted quarter note for a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and then on the rest you're going 4E and So 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and And it's going to sound like this. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and So it's almost a 16th note pickup into the next measure. It just has a different bum, almost like it holds longer than you expect. Bum, and it's like oops, ba ba, oops, ba ba. Like almost you made a mistake, but it's a purposeful mistake, and it definitely adds a different type of moving along feeling to this. This one might be more of a turtle slowly walking across, and then maybe sometimes he'll like stumble and then get back on again, something like that. Something to visualize what we're doing. And again, there's a reason I keep doing this. So as promised in the intro, we started with some simple rhythm patterns. We built on that, and we're going to even build some more to rhythm set 3. So the next 3 rhythms I'm going to show you are syncopated rhythms. You may have heard this before. So rhythms that fall on the beat are just normal standard rhythms, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. But what if I, remember we were counting the eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So what if I had the chords on the ands of the beats like this? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You can see it definitely created a different type of sound, and that's what we call syncopation. All syncopation is instead of hitting on beats 1, 2, 3, or 4, your primary beats, you hit on what we call the off beats. 1 and, or the upbeats rather, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And this is the first type of syncopated rhythm. We are syncopating the first beat with this rest here, because now we are actually playing beat 2, or excuse me, we're playing the first chord on the and of beat 1, sorry. So this is actually 1 and 2 and then we get back into like normal territory. 4 and 3 and 4 and, like that. And it's going to sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 4 and ba, ba, ba. And like all these, you may notice that I only count out the first couple measures, and then I kind of do it by feel. And I recommend you do the same thing, where you chart it out at first, being real exact with it, and then try to internalize these rhythms. Try to really understand ba, 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 and then you can really get a much better understanding. And actually, it helps with the memorizing them as well. So chart them out and get a feel for them. But that's what the syncopating the first beat would do, since we are basically delaying it and then playing it here and then playing over beat 2 as well. So we're kind of syncopating both the first and second beat, and then by the last 2 beats we're just on normal beat schedule, because they fit on right on the beat, number 3 and number 4. So if it falls on the beat, it's probably not syncopated, but it falls off the beat, it probably is. So here's another one. This is syncopation created with ties. This is very common. When you see syncopation, you're going to see something with like either a rest starting out, and that makes sense, right? Since that delays the beat, an eighth rest, or if you see ties, because that does the same thing, as you'll find out right now. So here's our first beat, right? 1 and. That's what this quarter note's going to take up. And then 2, this is the first half of 2, and then and, 3 and then kind of like the last time, once we get to the last part of the beat, we are in the clear. So this is going to hold up for 1 and 2, hitting again on and then 3 and 4 and. And I always like to do these little underlines. It just helps me remember how much value of the notes, each of the notes are taking up. So this one, what we're doing is we're hitting on beat 1, and then we're actually delaying beat 2, right? Because that's where the chord's going to hit again. So it's going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, ba, 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 bum, bum, bum. And once you get the feel for it, or once you chart it out, you should get the feel for it. Okay, now let's do this. What if we had on beat 1, and then we hit on beat 2, and then we kind of mess with beat 3, moving it over. So now we've kind of syncopated beat 3. So here's what it's going to look like charted out. 1 and, that's what that's going to take up. 2 and 3, actually, because that's tied over, and 4. And because we have a tie in here, we know we have some kind of syncopation going on. That's usually a big clue, or like I said, an eighth rest is usually a big clue as well, since that delays the beat also. So this one's going to sound like this. I'm going to play it with both hands this time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and ba 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 ba. So give that one a practice. We are actually now going to show you one more type of syncopation where we are messing now with the end of the beats. We have 2 standard beats here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and. Then we're moving on the end of 4. Let me chart it out for you. All right, and that's going to sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 4. So as you can see, just by moving over the beat, creating syncopated patterns, it adds a lot more intrigue to our rhythm patterns. Now, I'm going to show you just some fun patterns you can do, and then we're even going to build on it from there. I promised in the beginning they would get more interesting, and we are here. Now, the first thing I want to mention before I show you this pattern is if we go back a bunch, let's find the right place. Do you remember this one? Where we were doing 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 4 E and a 2, 3, 4. Where we were kind of sneaking in a note there on the last 16th. Well, this one's the same idea, but it's a little bit harder, but it's also cooler at the same time, and you'll see what I mean. But remember this counting, because this is going to come into play right now, I promise. So here we are. It's the same pattern. However, at the end, it's actually a different chord. And I actually wrote out all 4 measures for this one because I have to show you how each chord moves between each other. And this one's actually really cool. So this one we call an anticipation. And so what we're doing is we're playing the chord, and then instead of playing the next chord on beat 1, we're actually shifting it over to the of beat 4. So 4E and So we're hitting it just a 16th note early. And the same thing when we hit the next chord, we're hitting it a 16th note early. And you'll see that this creates a different type of sound. And actually, because we're dealing with, you see rests, eighth rests, you're seeing ties. What type of rhythm thing is going on here? What do you think? We just talked about it. It is syncopation, right? We're actually syncopating that beat 1. We're kind of moving it over, shifting it over where you wouldn't quite expect it. So let me show you the sound of this one. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... And you can see that the chords changed a little bit before you anticipated, which created a type of different sound. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... This one's called a chord anticipation rhythm because we're anticipating the chord in the next measure. That one's probably going to be one of the tougher rhythms to get right, so I actually recommend practicing it a bunch, but now we're going to get into a simpler one. So I just wrote out the first measure of this one, but we're doing it for all the chords. And this is what we call a boom, chuck, chuck, chuck. And it's called boom, chuck, chuck because of literally the way it sounds. Boom, chuck, 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 boom, chuck, chuck, chuck. And that's really all you do. You go through each chord. As you can see, it has like a slower moving along feeling to it. But it almost sounds like a dance, right? And if it was in 3/4, this is what we would call a waltz pattern. And in 3/4, we're basically just doing the same thing. We're just getting rid of that last beat. And it'd be something like this. So even changing it to 3 gave it a different pattern because now it's more like a stepping. That's why they call it a waltz. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You may have heard people say that as they're dancing, and that's what they're referring to. Okay, got another pattern for you, and actually, after this set, we're going to start doing some more things with our right hand if you've been wondering what to do with them. This one, though, we call an Alberti bass pattern. And it goes like this. So instead of playing the chord, instead of playing it as an arpeggio, bottom to the top, you're actually playing the arpeggio out of order. You're playing the bottom note, top note, middle, top. And then you change chords, bottom, top, middle, top, bottom, top, middle, top, bottom, top, middle. And as you mess around with the Alberti bass pattern, it might sound something like this. Okay, this next pattern is commonly used in jazz, and it's called a walking bass. And then you might even see it do this. But we're only doing the first 4 notes for each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's called a walking bass because it just walks up. Do, 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 do. And now, we're doing it a little differently than we did the chords. So let me show you. So the first measure is this. Second measure is this. So E, G, B, C this time. So a little different than what we've been doing. You're going to move to F, hit F, A, C, D, and then G, B, D, E. So beginning to end, it's going to sound like this. I always like to add like some stinger chords at the end, almost like a 16th note pickup like we talked about. Just adding like another one, ba, ba. Little things you can add in there to make things more interesting. So now I'm going to take the walking bass pattern I just showed you, and we're going to play it as 8th notes. 1 and 2 and I'm going to repeat the same thing with my right hand. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. As you can see, just by double timing it and splitting it up, it's kind of added some intrigue to it. And let's play it a little faster. I always like these, like the quarter notes, these 8th notes and 16th notes sound the best with some speed. So let's try it out. As you can see, by doing that, it added some extra spice to it. It almost sounded like a bubbly motion. And it sounds like bubbles. And I mentioned in the beginning and in the middle and a few minutes ago, there's a reason I keep making parallels between these chord patterns and the way things sound. And gee, I wonder what that's going to be about. Anyway, let's continue. We have many more rhythm patterns to cover, but for now, it's story time. So in this story time, I was back in 7th grade. I was trying out for jazz band, and it was the first audition I ever had to do. We had to play the 12-bar blues, basically playing chords in your left hand to a rhythm pattern and then improvising with your right hand. And I tried out, and guess what? The first time I didn't make it. And I played the 12-bar blues okay, but it was overly simplistic. There was another kid in the class named Dan who came in. He knew all these little tricks I'm showing you today. He knew about the Alberti pace patterns, the walking arpeggios, all the stuff, the boom chuck chucks that I showed you. And he just blew everybody out of the water because he had this knowledge and I didn't. My stuff sounded super simple. It was literally like the first, the quarter notes or whatever. Basically what we call simple comping, where you're just hitting the chords with it. He knew all the tricks. And unfortunately, I didn't get in a jazz band, but I went to my teacher, Mr. Armstrong. I know, the most piano teacher name sounding ever. And he showed me how to do like the anticipated chord type of thing, or how to do, the Alberti bass and all this stuff. You wouldn't use Alberti bass so much in jazz, but the walking bass you would certainly use. And I actually did learn that at that time. And guess what? In 8th grade and in 9th grade, I tried again, and I did get in a jazz band because I knew more of these little tricks. And, Dan was, of course, lit in too, but they were like, oh, he's as good as Dan. No, I'm just kidding. Forget about Dan. He doesn't matter anymore. Anyways, that's the moral of the story. I didn't know this stuff. I bombed my audition, and then I went back to my teacher. I learned the stuff, and I did much better. It actually brings me to an important point. If you want to be successful at piano or anything, it's a 4-step process. It's plan, execute, analyze, and adjust. You make a plan. Oh, I'm going to do this audition. You go do the audition. You're executing. And then you maybe didn't get in, so you analyze what you did wrong, and then you learn new stuff, which is adjust, and then you repeat the thing over again. And that's the most important thing I could ever teach you. And the B-flat blues is still something I play along with to this day. It really just involves playing a walking bass pattern in your right hand, or left hand, sorry, to the chord progression of the B-flat blues, and then you're going to improvise with your right hand using something called the B-flat blues scale, or even comping chords, where you're just hitting the chords at a rhythm. You know, like a syncopated rhythm is usually pretty good for blues and jazz. So I'm going to just play, you know, a quick excerpt of this to kind of show you that what we're kind of working up to. Now you may be thinking, whoa, Tim didn't show me about what to do with the right hand or all that other weird stuff he did. Well, I'm going to do my best in the remaining time in this lesson to teach you as much of the little tricks and fun stuff as possible. So let's continue. We're moving on to rhythm set 5, and in this set we're going to be combining a lot of ideas that we talked about so far to make things more interesting. So you don't always have to just play chords with your left hand. There's a few other things you can do, which I'm going to show you right now. One of these things is pulsing on octaves. So I just added some syncopated rhythms in between there, just really playing between octaves. And a syncopated rhythm in the right hand. Feel free to experiment around with different syncopations and different rhythms doing this. And, you know, using the octaves in your left hand kind of helps simplify it, kind of helps me concentrate on the rhythm of the chords a little bit more. You can do the opposite. Another thing you can do is you can play like combining ideas, doing like an Alberti bass in the left hand. And which one is that again? Bottom, top, middle, top. And you can maybe do them with octaves. Remember earlier I was talking about the walking bass arpeggio? Like that? Well, so it'll be like this. 1, 2, 3. Now what I want you to try is this. Now we're building into the next section, but I do want to tell you about this so far. So I want to talk about chord tones real quick. So in your left hand, you have notes. Now your right hand, you can choose chord tones if you want to create something that sounds pleasant, although maybe not the most interesting. So while I'm playing these chords, I'm just going to do the 4-quarter note one. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to play some chord tones with my right hand. And I'm going to play them like in whatever order I want to. But I'm just making sure that whenever I'm playing a C major chord, I'm sticking to the C, E, G. Then we change chord, E, G, B. You got to stick to the chord in the left hand. And I created a simple song using chords with my left hand and chord tones with my right hand. So feel free to take some time after this lesson to experiment with all the different rhythm patterns we've talked about so far, but I do have something special for you at the end if you're looking to do just that. But before we do that, we have to move on to the 6th rhythm set, which actually I'm going to finally tell you what to do with that right hand besides just playing chord tones. Okay, so we just talked about chord tones, right? They're notes within a chord. Playing C, E, or G down here, chord tone would be C, E, or G. Now, I need to tell you about something to make the right hand a lot better, and we can start actually creating melodies, because melody is like this singable line of music on the top, usually on the top, and it's usually the part of the song that we're going to remember. So what is the melody to Jingle Bells? Right? What about the melody to Fur Elise? And those melodies use just more than chord tones to make that happen. So let's get started here. Let's take a look here. What are our chord tones? Our chord tones are C, E, or G, right? That's what we have in our left hand. And so this first note I have coming in here with my right hand is a chord tone. What about the second note? Well, there's no D in that chord, right? So that is what we call a non-chord tone, NCT for short. And this type of NCT, or non-chord tone, we call this a passing tone. And it's because we start on a chord tone, we pass through this note back to another chord tone. So passing tone, right? And one thing I want to tell you about all non-chord tones is that they must resolve. And what that means is when you're playing them, you can't just hang out right there. As you can tell, it clashes quite a bit. So they always want to resolve. So when you're coming in from a chord tone, you hit a non-chord tone, guess what your next note's going to be? Some sort of chord tone, meaning that it's resolving. It creates non-chord tones, create tension. Remember this. Music, interesting music anyway, is about tension and release. And non-chord tones create tension, and resolving them creates the release. Now I'm going to play through our pattern that we've talked about, and I'm going to play a few patterns with non-chord tones to show how you can make a real melody, a real simple melody, but more interesting than the ones we've talked about so far. So here we go. As you could hear, we had da 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 dum, ba, da, da, da. It made it so much more interesting because we're sliding notes down now, rather than this type of thing. It can get a little bit monotonous, so now we're adding a little more intrigue. So that is called a passing tone. You can pass below and you can pass above. So here's a they just call them passing tones, but you could call this like maybe a lower passing tone, since it's passing to a lower chord tone. Now, what if they had this? Here's how you might incorporate a passing tone going up, right? Our E and G are still chord tones, and that's our NCT. As you can see, my handwriting is beautiful, and it's going to sound like this. And once again, it resolves. It doesn't do this. End of song, right? You never hear that. It goes, ah, there we go. It resolved. And that's what we always want from our non-chord tones. So those are our passing tones. Feel free to add in passing tones. You can do it like I did right in the beginning. And then I knew on the next measure, I knew this was going to be a chord tone, and I could pass to another one right there. So it might take some forethought to add in these passing tones, but by adding them into your improv, your melodies and stuff, it's going to make things sound a whole lot more interesting. And you're going to see it in your music all the time. The next type of non-chord tone is called the upper neighbor. And just like the other one we had chord tone, because we have C, E, G down here. So the E is a chord tone. The F is our non-chord tone. So do we do this? End of piece. No, we do. It resolves back down. It creates a soothing sound, tension, and then what do? We release that tension. It's like a suspended chord where you're suspending one of the notes over. So technically we have almost a non-chord tone in this chord, and then they resolve. So that's called a 4-3 suspension, since we're suspending the fourth note over the third note. So that's an upper neighbor. What if it did this? You may be thinking, Tim, is there a lower neighbor? Yes, there do be. Yes, there is. I should speak proper English, I guess. Now, does it do this? End of piece. I mean, that sounded okay. Yeah, see how it just sounds so much better when things finally resolve. It's like if I did this. And you're like, man, I really want him to do hit that final note. And music has a lot of notes that pull towards one area or another, or one way or another, and that creates tension or release. And another thing that creates tension is the good old leading tone that really wants to lead you back to the tonic or the starting note that you started with. Now, what if we had this example? We have chord tone, a non-chord tone, and then it resolves, but it doesn't resolve the way you think it would. Like in a passing tone, it would be like E, F, G, and this is E, F, C. So it's not even a lower neighbor or an upper neighbor, because an upper neighbor would be this. And this one we call an escape tone. You're stepping up and escaping. You're like stepping up out of the burning building and you're escaping. I know that's not the best imagery in the world, but somebody in my theory class said that one time, and I'm like, oh, I remember what it is now. There's actually a bunch of non-chord tones, and if you want me to make a lesson on non-chord tones specifically, let me know in the comments. It's not something I'm planning in the immediate future, but if you want to know it, maybe I'll make a live stream, or I did the James Corden thing right there. Or I will do it either in a live stream or a video. Let me know in the comments. But we still do have more to cover. So all the rhythms patterns we talked about today were in simple time signatures. So 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Specifically, we talked about 4/4 a whole lot. But what if you had some rhythm patterns in a compound time signature like 6/8? Okay, so 6/8, and here's how it works if you don't know. So now we have our bottom number is an 8 instead of a 4. And remember in 4/4 that the bottom number being a 4 means that the quarter note gets one beat. At least you know that now, right? Because if you drew it, this is the way I like to think about it. If you drew it as like a 1/4, see, like this, that would be a quarter, right? But say we had 6/8, and say this was 1 out of 8. So that tells us now that the 8th note gets one beat. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, if an 8th note before got half of a beat, and now it gets a whole beat, a quarter note, which was worth one beat, now gets 2, because the conversion is everything is now doubled. The half note's now worth 4. The dotted half note is now worth 6. And this is the first type of rhythm pattern you're going to see in 6/8. 6/8 loves, loves, loves to group things into 2 groups of 3s. And it's simply going to be counted like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But another way we do it is we can count it in 2, with each beat having 3 equal parts. It's almost like counting 2 beats of triplets a little bit, but it's a little different. So it's going to be 1, 2, 1, 2. So there's actually 2 measures of 6/8. And 6/8 always has kind of a little bit of a waltzy feel, 1, 2, or a dancey kind of feel. And you could think about like you're kind of stepping back, stepping forward with each ba 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 ba. Like that. So in a chord progression, it's going to sound something like this. Something else you might see is this quarter note, 8th, quarter note, 8th. Remember now that the quarter notes now get 2 beats, 1, 2, and then 3 on this 8th note, 4, 5, 6. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, why would you commonly find that in 6/8? Well, it does divide perfectly into 2 parts, which, like I said, 6/8 likes to do, but I said 2 parts of 3, right? So how does this work? Well, the quarter note is really worth 2 8th notes, right? And then you have this worth also an 8th note. So the quarter note's really just taking up, oh, let me make sure you can see that. The quarter note's really just taking up 2 of those 8th notes. Instead of 1, 2, 3, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But because the measure can be evenly divided into those 2 parts, and then you can kind of break it down into 3s from there, It works, and you're going to see this type of rhythm in 6/8 a lot. Okay. See how the ba bum ba, kind of like a swaying da da, and so 6/8 is really good for dances, sort of things, kind of like 3/4 is with the waltz. You might see the opposite, where you have eighth quarter, eighth quarter. Now, why is this one okay? Well, you can see that it splits evenly pretty well into two spots. Excuse my brackets there. I know they're wonderful looking. But again, we can still split this into three because you got the eighth note worth one, and then this is going to take up the second two in that grouping of three. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it works out just perfect. Now, what you're not going to see in 6/8 at all is 3 quarter notes. Now you're like, why is that? Well, quarter note gets 2, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But can I split this into 2 parts? No, you can't. So I'm telling you, if you can't split it into 2 parts, you're probably not going to see it in 6/8, or at least not anything written by a professional. You might see actually, I have a quick story time, actually. I wrote a piece. This was when I was starting music composition in school, and I wrote a piece with those 3 quarter notes, right? It was just like that. And that was the pulse of the whole song, those 3 quarter notes. Well, I gave it to somebody to play because that's what we had to do. We had to compose it. We had to then give it to a little group in the class to play. Like somebody would play trombone, somebody would play, whatever instruments you wanted. Because everybody in those classes, there was an instrumentalist of every instrument in those classes. So you could write it for any instrument. Anyway, I think it was a kid who played the trumpet. His name might have been John. I don't quite remember. But he played the trumpet, and he's like, I can't play this. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't play it? It's just simply in 6/8. And he's like, you wrote it in quarter notes. And I'm telling you right now that it makes it super confusing, and it just sounds really off and really weird. And it did. Trust me, I wish I could find that piece and show it to you. But there was another mini story time of another one of my failings. But hey, we all learn in life from these things. Anyway, let's continue. So I taught you about a ton of rhythm patterns in this lesson, both in simple time signatures like 4/4 and complex time signatures like 6/8. But there's still more to the lesson because I want to show you some additional chord patterns that you can use along with these rhythm patterns to get things that sound really, really nice. So here's the first additional chord pattern. C major from the bottom to the top, C, E, G. And then you could go to G major, bottom to top, G, B, D, A minor, A, C, E, and then F major, F, A, C. And you've probably heard this one. This is a pretty standard like pop song chord progression. And let me just play like a little diddle here with the things that we've been talking about here and see if we can come up with something just with this chord progression. So that one had a really nice upbeat types of sound to it, and it's probably because it had a lot of major chords. It had C major, G major, the only minor chord was A minor, and then we finished out with an F major chord. Next one you can play around with is C major, C, E, G, bottom of the top, A minor, A, C, E, F major, F, A, C, G major, G, B, D. So it's very similar to the chord progression I showed you. It's just instead of an E minor chord, it's to an A minor chord instead. And you can see just me doing that, you can tell it added a different quality and a different kind of sound to the piece. So let me practice a little bit on this chord progression, see what we can come up with. That one has kind of a standard, I would say, rock type of sound to it. Let me show you another one. C major, C, E, G, G major, F major, and then back to G major. And this one, actually, the other one I said was a rock progression. This one really is, because it's all major chords, right? like that. Well, let me show you the next one. We got, this one's a little trickier. You're going to do C major, and then you're going to do B flat major. The notes are going to be B flat, D, F from the bottom of the top. And down to F, F, A, C, and then back to C once again. And let's just come up with something on this one. Let's see what we can do. See what the difference in the sound is. One more to show you, and then you can play around these as you wish. The next one, we're going to start a little different. We're starting with A minor this time. What do you think the difference in the sound is going to be? It's probably going to sound a little bit drearier, at least at first, right? Because that's the difference between major and minor. So always be thinking about the difference. Always be thinking about like the different types of sounds that these chords and rhythm patterns are conveying. And then think about that, like if you're ever trying to write a piece. There's a little clue there for what we're going to talk about at the end. But anyway, let me show you this last chord pattern. You got A minor, G major, F major, and G major. It's a pretty simple one. It's kind of like the one we did before where you started with C major, G major, F major, G major. We're starting on minor this time. So expect a darker type of sound. So let's see what we got. And those are just some of the other standard chord patterns I wanted to show you. Feel free to play around with these chord patterns using some of the rhythm patterns that we talked about as well. We're moving into the final section now, and you may remember that throughout the lesson I've been saying like, oh, this represents a sunny day. This is like a turtle running through the grass or whatever I said. And I kept alluding to that there was like a point to this. There's a reason I kept bringing that up. There's a reason this sounds like a ball rolling along. There's a reason, you know, you want to think about like what picture the notes are painting in what you play. Composers do this all the time. Beethoven was famous for this. It's called tone painting, where he paints like a stormy, really stormy type of imagery just with the notes alone. And I'm going to show you how to do that, at least to a smaller extent, right now. And it's actually going to really tie together everything we talked about so that you get the most out of today's lesson as possible. And so now we're going to do something I didn't even promise in the beginning of the lesson, because that's what we do on this channel. We go above and beyond. So here we go. You have an assignment. I know it's what you were waiting for. You're like, man, I hope Tim gives me an assignment at the end. It's what I've lived my whole life up to for now. I'm just kidding, of course. So this is your assignment is this, and I want you to both do this right now as we're doing it together. And I also want you to do this a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the next week, and even ongoing, because it's actually really, really fun to do. Are you ready? Step 1, think of an overall idea that you want your song to convey. So we're going the other way around. Instead of being like, oh, this rhythm pattern sounds like this, we're going, this is what I want, and I need to figure out the rhythm pattern that makes sense for this, and the chord patterns. So what you do is you think of the overall idea. I'm going to do a rainy day. You're going to pick your chords. So if you're doing a rainy day, you might select minor chords, right? Sad. You know, probably want that with a sad type of day. Probably not really, really upbeat major chords. So we're doing, at least for me, I'm doing a rainy day. You're going to pick a different one. I am going to pick sad chords. I'm actually, you know what I'm going to do? I know it's a cop-out. I'm going to use the chord pattern that we started out today. Since rain isn't always just sad, it can be a little sad with like that minor chord, but then it can kind of have an uplifting as well. So that's why I'm choosing that. You could choose any chord pattern you really want to, although you do want to learn, either use the chord patterns I showed you or learn about chord patterns on your own. But here we go. We're going to do this, and we're going to combine all these ideas. We're doing rainy day, so I know that my chord progression is, and let's think real quick before I begin, what rhythm pattern should I use, right? So we're trying to translate the sound of rain onto the piano, and how are we going to do that? Well, think about the sound of rain, right? You can have consistent downpour like shh, where it's really like it sounds consistent just because there's like so much of it falling. You can have like drops, you know, thinking about how drops come down. They don't always fall evenly, do they? It could be like do 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 do, kind of like that. And I'm gonna try to translate some of those ideas onto the notes that I'm playing. And I think that's pretty good to start out with. And then let me see if I can add in maybe like kind of an uneven drop here or there. Wait. You know what? I almost kind of want to move these up because it'll be that to me sounds more like Rain has more of a like a higher pitched sound to it to me. I don't know. It's just like how I'm imagining it. And I think that really works well, right? Bump, 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 bump. So as you can see, just in a few minutes with the ideas we talked about today, I was able to paint a rainy scene. If I did it again, I may even pick some more minor chords to make it sound a little bit drearier even, and I could even play with those raindrop sounds some more to even figure out some new cool ways to illustrate raindrops on the piano. And that's what I want you to do, not with the raindrops so much, but think about like a painting that you want to paint or some kind of image that you want to convey. And then I want you to use the rhythm patterns we talked about today and the chord patterns to create that image on the piano. This is something that real composers do. You see it in your music all the time, and it's actually a higher level type of music technique that I want you to work on. If you want to truly master your instrument and rhythm in general, you're going to have to learn about some techniques to count rhythms perfectly, accurately, every single time. That's why your piano teacher, Tim, has you covered once again, because I want you to watch this lesson next that I made about how to count rhythms super accurately. Your piano teacher, Tim here. Thank you so much for coming today, and I'll see you, yes you, in the next lesson. Bye-bye.
Ta-ta and toodaloo, and fare thee well, and bon voyage, arrivederci too.